Hello, friends. Welcome to Sleep in Bible, where we bring you spiritual guidance and deep teachings that can truly illuminate your life. Today's video is going to be powerful, because we're diving into the 15 powerful deep teachings of Jesus, timeless principles that can strengthen your faith, guide your daily decisions, improve your relationships, and bring peace to your heart. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps our community grow and allows us to bring more meaningful content to you. So, let's get started and explore these 15 powerful teachings of Jesus that can truly transform your spiritual journey and your life. 1. Love your enemies. One of the most profound and challenging teachings of Jesus is the instruction to love your enemies. This principle stands at the heart of Christian ethics and morality, challenging conventional human instincts that often lean toward anger, retaliation, and self-preservation. To truly understand the depth of this teaching, it is essential to explore its meaning, implications, and transformative power in the life of an individual and society. At first glance, the idea of loving those who oppose or harm us may seem counterintuitive. Human nature tends to respond to hostility with hostility. When someone wrongs us, our instinct is often to retaliate, defend ourselves, or distance ourselves from them. However, Jesus calls his followers to a higher standard, a standard that goes beyond human instinct and requires a radical shift in perspective and behavior. By commanding us to love our enemies, Jesus challenges the natural human inclination for vengeance and encourages a path of compassion, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Loving one's enemies does not mean passivity or allowing oneself to be harmed without consequence. Instead, it is about the inner disposition of the heart. It involves seeing the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of their actions toward us, and responding with compassion rather than hatred. When Jesus taught, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you," he introduced a revolutionary way of thinking that transforms relationships and breaks the cycle of violence and resentment. This teaching is not limited to a passive feeling. It is an active practice that involves deliberate choices to respond with kindness, understanding, and patience. Understanding why Jesus emphasizes this teaching requires considering the broader context of his message. Jesus consistently promoted love as the ultimate guiding principle. He emphasized that God's love extends to all people, not just to those who are obedient, righteous, or easy to love. By asking his followers to love their enemies, Jesus mirrors the inclusiveness of God's love and calls believers to reflect divine love in their own lives. It is a call to rise above the limitations of human prejudice and judgment, embracing a more profound, universal perspective of compassion. Practically applying this teaching can take many forms. Loving your enemies might mean showing patience in the face of insults, offering help when it is undeserved, or speaking words of encouragement rather than harsh criticism. It might involve seeking reconciliation after conflict rather than harboring bitterness or resentment. Loving enemies also entails empathy, striving to understand the struggles, fears, and motivations that lead someone to act against us. By seeking understanding, we reduce the grip of anger and create space for healing and transformation. One significant aspect of loving enemies is its transformative power on the individual practicing it. Harboring hatred and resentment is emotionally and spiritually draining. It fosters bitterness, disrupts inner peace, and often perpetuates cycles of conflict. In contrast, choosing to love even those who oppose us cultivates humility, patience, and resilience. It enables individuals to experience freedom from the burden of anger and resentment. Jesus' teaching, therefore, is not only morally significant but also psychologically liberating. It transforms the heart of the one who practices it, creating a source of inner peace and emotional strength that cannot be achieved through retaliation or revenge. Loving enemies also has profound social implications. When communities embrace this principle, the cycle of violence, retaliation, and division can be broken. Historical examples show how leaders and movements grounded in this teaching have promoted reconciliation and justice through nonviolence and forgiveness. By refusing to respond to hate with hate, communities create opportunities for dialogue, understanding, and healing. Jesus' teaching encourages a society in which conflict is approached not with aggression, but with a desire to restore relationships and foster mutual respect. It is important to recognize that loving enemies is a gradual process that may require conscious effort and spiritual guidance. For many, this teaching challenges deeply ingrained instincts and emotional patterns. It is not a single act but a consistent lifestyle choice, a commitment to respond to adversity with love rather than retaliation. Prayer, reflection, and empathy are essential tools for cultivating this capacity. Jesus' own life serves as the ultimate example. Despite facing betrayal, injustice, and crucifixion, he consistently demonstrated love and forgiveness, even toward those who caused him harm. Moreover, loving one's enemies does not imply ignoring justice or accountability. It is possible to stand for what is right, seek justice, and protect oneself while simultaneously maintaining a heart of love and compassion toward adversaries. The focus is on the internal disposition of the heart and the intention behind one's actions. By choosing love over hatred, individuals can pursue justice without becoming consumed by anger, bitterness, or a desire for revenge. This nuanced understanding reveals the depth of Jesus' teaching, showing that love and moral integrity are not mutually exclusive but deeply interconnected. In conclusion, the teaching to love your enemies is a cornerstone of Jesus' moral philosophy, challenging believers to rise above instinctive responses of hatred and retaliation. It calls for a radical reorientation of the heart and mind, promoting empathy, compassion, and understanding even in the face of opposition. Practicing this principle leads to personal transformation, inner peace, and stronger, more harmonious communities. It mirrors the divine love of God, which is impartial and boundless, and encourages followers to reflect this love in their own lives. Though difficult, embracing this teaching holds the power to transform individuals and societies alike, making it one of the most powerful and life-changing lessons Jesus ever shared. 2. Forgive others. Forgiveness is one of the most powerful teachings of Jesus, and it lies at the very heart of his message. To forgive others is not merely to overlook a wrong or pretend that harm has not occurred. It is a deliberate act of the will, a conscious choice to release resentment, anger, and the desire for revenge. Jesus emphasized forgiveness repeatedly, making it clear that the act of forgiving is not optional for his followers. It is a cornerstone of a life aligned with God's will. Understanding the depth and significance of this teaching requires a careful exploration of its meaning, its challenges, and the profound transformation it brings both to the forgiver and to society. At first glance, forgiveness may seem simple in theory but incredibly difficult in practice. When someone hurts us deeply, our natural response is often anger, bitterness, or a desire for retribution. These reactions are instinctual and serve as a form of self-protection. However, Jesus' command to forgive challenges this instinct, urging believers to rise above natural human inclinations. Forgiveness, according to Jesus, is not about condoning wrongdoing or excusing harmful behavior. Rather, it is about freeing the heart from the corrosive effects of hatred and resentment. In forgiving, we reclaim peace for ourselves and open the door for reconciliation and healing. The importance of forgiveness is evident in Jesus' teachings. In the Lord's Prayer, he instructs his followers to ask God for forgiveness in the same measure that they forgive others. This connection between receiving and extending forgiveness highlights its spiritual significance. We cannot fully experience God's grace unless we are willing to extend that grace to others. Forgiveness, therefore, is both a spiritual discipline and a moral obligation. It is an essential practice for anyone seeking to live a life of integrity, love, and alignment with divine principles. Forgiveness begins with understanding and empathy. When someone causes us pain, taking the time to consider their perspective, motivations, and struggles can shift our focus from anger to compassion. This does not justify their actions, but it humanizes them, reminding us that all individuals are flawed and capable of error. Jesus recognized the complexity of human nature and called his followers to embrace a higher perspective, seeing beyond the immediate harm to the potential for transformation and redemption. Forgiveness, then, is an act of courage and strength. It requires a willingness to move beyond the natural instinct to retaliate and to place trust in the possibility of change. The act of forgiving also has profound psychological and emotional benefits. Harboring anger and resentment can be spiritually and emotionally draining. It can poison relationships, erode trust, and create a cycle of bitterness that affects every aspect of life. By forgiving, we release ourselves from the grip of negative emotions and restore our inner peace. Jesus' teaching emphasizes that forgiveness is not only for the benefit of the offender but also for the well-being of the one who forgives. It liberates the heart, allowing love, joy, and peace to flourish. Applying the teaching of forgiveness in everyday life can take many forms. It may involve forgiving someone who has spoken harshly or betrayed our trust. It may involve forgiving those who have caused us significant pain, whether through intentional acts or careless mistakes. True forgiveness often requires repeated effort, as deep wounds do not heal overnight. It demands patience, reflection, and a commitment to see beyond the immediate hurt. Jesus' example, his forgiveness of those who crucified him, demonstrates the ultimate power of forgiveness, even in the face of unimaginable injustice. It is essential to recognize that forgiveness does not equate to forgetting or allowing ongoing harm. Setting boundaries and protecting oneself is compatible with forgiveness. Jesus' teaching calls for a heart of release, not a life of vulnerability to repeated harm. Forgiveness is an internal transformation, a shift in perspective and emotion that frees the heart, rather than a guarantee of external change in the behavior of others. By forgiving, we regain control over our emotional and spiritual state, refusing to let past injuries define our present or future. Moreover, forgiveness fosters reconciliation and stronger relationships. When individuals extend genuine forgiveness, they open the possibility for healing, restoration, and mutual understanding. Communities, families, and societies benefit immensely when forgiveness is practiced, as it prevents the escalation of conflict and promotes peace and unity. Historical examples abound of societies transformed by the practice of forgiveness, from leaders who led with mercy rather than vengeance to movements that replaced cycles of violence with reconciliation. Jesus' teaching reminds us that forgiveness is not passive, it is a courageous and proactive act that has the power to transform both personal and collective life. Spiritually, forgiving others aligns us with the nature and character of God. God's love and mercy are limitless, and Jesus calls his followers to reflect that divine attribute in their own lives. By forgiving, we participate in the divine process of redemption and grace. We become instruments of healing in a world often marred by hurt and injustice. This alignment with God's will strengthens faith, deepens spiritual maturity, and nurtures a life of humility, compassion, and love. In conclusion, forgiveness is one of the most challenging yet life-changing teachings of Jesus. It calls believers to rise above instinct, to release anger and resentment, and to embrace compassion, understanding, and grace. Forgiving others is not only an act of obedience to God but also a pathway to inner peace, emotional freedom, and spiritual growth. It strengthens relationships, fosters harmony in communities, and reflects the infinite love of God in human life. Although difficult, practicing forgiveness transforms the heart, the soul, and ultimately the world, embodying the essence of Jesus' revolutionary teaching. 3. Humility is strength. Humility is one of the core teachings of Jesus, yet it is often misunderstood in contemporary society. Many perceive humility as weakness, passivity, or self-effacement. However, Jesus presents humility not as a lack of power, but as a form of true strength, an inner fortitude that allows individuals to live authentically, serve others selflessly, and align themselves with God's will. Understanding humility through the lens of Jesus' teachings reveals its transformative power and its essential role in personal growth, spiritual development, and meaningful relationships. At its essence, humility involves recognizing one's limitations, embracing one's dependence on God, and valuing others above oneself. It is the conscious choice to set aside pride, ego, and self-centeredness in order to serve, learn, and grow. In Matthew 23:12, Jesus says, "Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." This statement challenges conventional notions of power and success. While the world often associates strength with dominance, control, and recognition, Jesus teaches that true strength lies in self-awareness, meekness, and the willingness to submit to higher principles. One of the most powerful aspects of humility is its ability to foster openness and growth. A humble person acknowledges that they do not have all the answers, that they are capable of mistakes, and that there is always room for improvement. This recognition enables learning, reflection, and meaningful transformation. Pride, in contrast, closes the mind and heart, making one resistant to correction, guidance, and constructive feedback. By practicing humility, individuals become more receptive to wisdom, more empathetic toward others, and more attuned to spiritual truths. Humility also enhances relationships. When individuals approach others without arrogance, judgment, or self-interest, they create space for genuine connection. Humble people listen, value other perspectives, and prioritize the well-being of others over the desire for recognition or control. Jesus modeled this in his interactions with his disciples and the people he served. He washed his disciples' feet, spent time with the marginalized, and consistently put the needs of others above his own comfort and status. These actions demonstrate that humility is not passive submission, it is active love expressed through service, respect, and compassion. Moreover, humility cultivates resilience and inner peace. Those who cling to pride and ego often experience anxiety, fear, and insecurity because their self-worth is tied to external validation. Humble individuals, however, anchor their identity in God's love and guidance rather than worldly measures of success. This foundation allows them to remain steady in the face of challenges, criticism, or failure. By relinquishing the need to control every situation and every perception, they gain emotional balance, clarity, and a deeper sense of purpose. Jesus' own life exemplifies this principle. Though he possessed divine authority, he chose the path of humility, submission, and service, demonstrating that strength is inseparable from humility. Humility also enables forgiveness and reconciliation. When we recognize our own imperfections, it becomes easier to forgive others and approach conflicts with understanding rather than prideful defensiveness. Humility softens the heart, allowing grace, patience, and compassion to flourish. By acknowledging that we are not inherently superior to others, we can see them with empathy and respond to wrongdoing with wisdom rather than retribution. This capacity to forgive and reconcile strengthens both personal character and social harmony. Practically, cultivating humility requires intentional effort and reflection. It begins with self-awareness, honestly evaluating one's motivations, acknowledging weaknesses, and seeking guidance from God. Practices such as prayer, meditation, service to others, and gratitude help nurture humility. Serving without expectation of reward, listening more than speaking, and giving credit to others are tangible expressions of humility that reinforce its strength. Over time, these practices transform not only one's behavior but also one's heart and mind, aligning them more closely with divine principles. Humility does not equate to self-deprecation or denial of one's value. Rather, it involves recognizing one's worth without arrogance and embracing one's role in a larger purpose beyond oneself. It is the strength to admit mistakes, to seek help, to learn from others, and to place God at the center of life. This understanding reframes humility as an active and courageous choice, one that requires integrity, moral courage, and inner discipline. Far from being a sign of weakness, it is a demonstration of spiritual maturity and profound inner strength. In addition, humility is closely linked to leadership and influence. Jesus' leadership was characterized not by coercion or domination, but by service, guidance, and example. True leaders, as demonstrated by him, inspire and uplift rather than control and belittle. They empower others, listen with empathy, and make decisions grounded in justice and compassion. This model of humble leadership contrasts sharply with worldly notions of authority based on fear, power, or ego. By following Jesus' example, individuals learn that humility amplifies influence, cultivates trust, and fosters lasting positive impact. In conclusion, humility is a cornerstone of Jesus' teachings, representing a profound and transformative form of strength. It challenges the conventional wisdom that equates power with dominance, teaching instead that true strength arises from self-awareness, service, empathy, and dependence on God. Humility fosters personal growth, nurtures relationships, promotes forgiveness, and cultivates inner peace. It empowers leaders to guide with wisdom and compassion and equips individuals to navigate life with resilience and grace. By embracing humility, believers align themselves with the example set by Jesus, reflecting divine strength through love, service, and integrity. In a world often driven by pride, competition, and self-interest, humility remains a revolutionary and life-changing principle that transforms hearts and lives alike. 4. Serve others selflessly. One of the most enduring and transformative teachings of Jesus is the call to serve others selflessly. While service is a concept present in many cultures and religions, Jesus redefined it as the essence of true greatness and spiritual maturity. Serving others without expectation of reward or recognition challenges human instincts of self-interest and ego, yet it lies at the core of a meaningful, impactful, and spiritually aligned life. Understanding the depth of this teaching requires exploring its principles, practical applications, and the transformative power it has on both the individual and the community. At its heart, selfless service is about putting the needs and well-being of others above personal gain. Jesus repeatedly emphasized that greatness is measured not by status, wealth, or power, but by the willingness to serve. In Matthew 20:26-28, he declares, "Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This radical teaching turns conventional notions of leadership and success upside down. Instead of seeking recognition, authority, or personal advantage, followers of Jesus are called to embrace humility and selflessness in service to others. Serving others selflessly requires a shift in mindset. Human nature often equates service with obligation or sacrifice, but Jesus invites a deeper perspective. Service is an expression of love, compassion, and moral integrity. When service comes from the heart, it becomes a source of joy rather than a burden. It is not merely an act of charity or duty, it is a conscious choice to embody love in action. By serving without expecting anything in return, individuals participate in a higher form of spiritual practice, reflecting the love of God through tangible deeds. Practical examples of selfless service abound in Jesus' life. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, comforted the grieving, and spent time with those marginalized by society, all without seeking personal gain or recognition. Each act of service was motivated by compassion and empathy, not by the desire for status or reward. By modeling this behavior, Jesus set a standard for his followers, demonstrating that true spiritual growth is inseparable from acts of kindness and selfless love toward others. His life teaches that serving others is not limited to grand gestures, even small, everyday acts of kindness carry profound significance. Selfless service also has transformative effects on the one who serves. When individuals focus on the needs of others, they cultivate empathy, patience, and humility. Serving challenges self-centeredness and broadens perspective, allowing one to appreciate the struggles, joys, and humanity of others. This practice fosters emotional intelligence, strengthens character, and nurtures spiritual growth. The act of giving without expectation also reinforces inner contentment, as it shifts focus from personal desire to meaningful contribution. In essence, the more we serve, the more we grow spiritually and emotionally. Moreover, selfless service strengthens communities and relationships. When individuals consistently act with compassion and care, they build trust, cooperation, and social cohesion. Communities thrive when members prioritize collective well-being over individual gain, creating environments of support, solidarity, and mutual respect. Jesus' teaching emphasizes that every act of service, no matter how small, contributes to the greater good. By fostering a culture of selflessness, communities can break cycles of selfishness, conflict, and inequality, replacing them with empathy, cooperation, and justice. It is important to note that selfless service is not without challenges. Modern society often emphasizes competition, individual achievement, and self-interest, making the practice of genuine service countercultural. Serving without expecting recognition requires discipline, self-reflection, and a strong moral compass. It demands that one set aside ego and personal ambition, focusing instead on the impact of actions on others. Prayer, meditation, and regular reflection on spiritual principles can help cultivate the mindset necessary for consistent selfless service. Jesus' example serves as both inspiration and guide, showing that true fulfillment arises from serving with love, integrity, and humility. Selfless service also aligns individuals with divine principles and the broader purpose of life. Jesus taught that serving others is not only a moral obligation but a pathway to spiritual alignment and fulfillment. By meeting the needs of others, individuals participate in God's work on earth, embodying divine love in tangible ways. This connection between service and spirituality reinforces the idea that the highest purpose of life is not self-gratification but contributing to the well-being of others, reflecting the heart and character of God. In addition, serving selflessly can transform societal structures and systems. When individuals embrace the principle of service as central to their lives, they influence social norms, policies, and institutions. Acts of service can inspire collective action, address systemic inequities, and promote justice and compassion on a broader scale. The ripple effect of selfless service extends far beyond individual relationships, creating waves of positive change in families, communities, and societies. Jesus' teaching demonstrates that true leadership and influence are rooted in service rather than authority or coercion. In conclusion, the teaching to serve others selflessly is one of the most powerful and transformative lessons Jesus imparted. It calls individuals to rise above self-interest, embrace humility, and act with love and compassion toward others. Selfless service nurtures spiritual growth, strengthens communities, and cultivates personal fulfillment and inner peace. By prioritizing the needs of others, individuals align with divine principles, contribute to the greater good, and experience profound transformation in their hearts and lives. In a world often driven by ego, competition, and self-centered ambition, the practice of serving others selflessly remains a revolutionary and life-changing principle that embodies the essence of Jesus' teachings. 5. Seek God above all. One of the most fundamental teachings of Jesus is the call to seek God above all else. This teaching emphasizes the primacy of spiritual life over material pursuits, worldly ambitions, and temporal concerns. Jesus' message encourages his followers to center their lives on God, trusting in divine guidance and provision rather than being consumed by the fleeting distractions of the world. To fully appreciate this principle, it is essential to explore its meaning, its implications for daily living, and the transformative impact it has on the human soul. At its core, seeking God above all involves prioritizing the relationship with the divine in every aspect of life. This principle is expressed in Matthew 6:33, where Jesus instructs, "But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." Here, Jesus is teaching that spiritual alignment, moral integrity, and devotion to God should take precedence over material concerns. The promise accompanying this instruction is profound. When individuals place God at the center of their lives, their needs, physical, emotional, and spiritual, are met in accordance with divine wisdom. Seeking God first is not about neglecting responsibilities or desires but about establishing the right order of priorities, ensuring that worldly pursuits are guided by spiritual principles. The teaching to seek God above all challenges the human tendency to prioritize comfort, wealth, status, and control. In the modern world, distractions abound. Career ambitions, social pressures, consumerism, and personal desires can easily dominate one's focus. Jesus' message calls believers to resist these distractions and cultivate a life of spiritual mindfulness. By placing God at the center, individuals develop clarity, purpose, and resilience. This alignment ensures that decisions, relationships, and goals are guided by principles of love, justice, and compassion rather than selfishness or impulsivity. Seeking God above all is not merely a mental acknowledgement or ritual practice, it is an active, lived experience. It involves prayer, meditation, study of scripture, and conscious reflection on the ways God is present in daily life. It also entails striving to live according to God's commandments, embracing moral integrity, and acting in service to others. By integrating spiritual practice into every aspect of life, individuals cultivate a deep sense of connection with the divine and develop the wisdom necessary to navigate life's challenges. Jesus' life exemplified this principle. His every action, teaching, and decision was rooted in communion with God, demonstrating the centrality of spiritual alignment. One of the profound effects of seeking God above all is the cultivation of trust and surrender. Life is inherently unpredictable, filled with uncertainties, challenges, and losses. Human beings often seek control and certainty through planning, accumulation, and self-reliance, yet these strategies can only provide temporary relief. Jesus teaches that placing God first fosters a deep trust in divine providence, allowing believers to navigate uncertainty with confidence and serenity. By seeking God's guidance, individuals learn to surrender anxieties, fears, and the illusion of control, replacing them with faith, hope, and inner peace. Furthermore, prioritizing God above all encourages moral and ethical living. When individuals seek God earnestly, they naturally align their actions with principles of righteousness, justice, and compassion. Material wealth and personal gain are no longer ultimate goals. Instead, actions are evaluated in the context of spiritual values and divine purpose. This shift in orientation promotes integrity, generosity, and empathy, fostering personal growth and strengthening relationships. Seeking God first transforms priorities, reshaping life around principles that are enduring rather than transient. The teaching also has profound implications for identity and self-understanding. Many individuals define themselves by social status, achievements, or external recognition. However, Jesus encourages a different foundation for self-worth: relationship with God. By seeking God above all, individuals discover a deeper sense of purpose and identity rooted in divine love. This foundation is unshakable, independent of external validation or circumstances. It enables believers to navigate challenges, rejection, and failure with resilience, knowing that their ultimate value and guidance come from God. Practically, seeking God above all can be expressed in everyday life through conscious choices and disciplined practices. Daily prayer, reading scripture, reflection on God's presence, and acts of service are essential elements of a life centered on the divine. Additionally, prioritizing time for spiritual growth over excessive indulgence in material or superficial pursuits fosters alignment with this teaching. It requires intentional effort, focus, and a willingness to resist societal pressures that equate success with wealth, power, or appearance. By consistently seeking God first, believers cultivate a life of depth, meaning, and spiritual fulfillment. It is important to note that seeking God above all does not mean abandoning responsibilities or living in isolation from the world. On the contrary, Jesus' teaching encourages engagement with the world through the lens of divine principles. Work, family, community, and personal goals are approached not merely as ends in themselves but as opportunities to practice righteousness, compassion, and integrity. Seeking God first transforms every aspect of life into a spiritual endeavor, creating harmony between worldly engagement and spiritual devotion. In addition, seeking God above all fosters gratitude and contentment. When individuals recognize that their ultimate guidance, provision, and purpose come from God, they are less likely to be consumed by envy, greed, or dissatisfaction. Life's challenges are viewed as opportunities for growth, and successes are received with humility and acknowledgement of divine support. This perspective nurtures emotional stability, resilience, and joy, creating a life characterized by balance, peace, and spiritual depth. In conclusion, the teaching to seek God above all is a cornerstone of Jesus' message, emphasizing the primacy of spiritual life over worldly distractions. It calls believers to align their thoughts, actions, and priorities with divine principles, cultivating trust, moral integrity, and inner peace. By placing God at the center, individuals experience transformation in identity, relationships, and purpose. This teaching provides guidance for navigating life's uncertainties, fostering gratitude, and living with meaning. In a world often dominated by materialism, competition, and self-interest, seeking God above all offers a path to profound fulfillment, resilience, and spiritual awakening, embodying one of the most life-changing lessons Jesus ever imparted. 6. Do not worry. One of the most comforting and transformative teachings of Jesus is the admonition, do not worry. At first, this may seem like simple advice or even impractical in a world full of responsibilities, uncertainties, and challenges. Yet, a closer look at Jesus' teaching reveals profound spiritual depth. By encouraging his followers not to worry, Jesus addresses one of the most common and destructive human tendencies, anxiety over the present and the future. This principle offers both spiritual guidance and practical strategies for achieving peace, trust, and resilience in daily life. Worry is a natural response to uncertainty. Human beings instinctively seek control over their environment, relationships, finances, and health. When outcomes are unpredictable or threats loom, the mind becomes consumed with concern, fear, and overthinking. While some level of caution is useful, chronic worry can paralyze decision-making, erode emotional well-being, and undermine faith. Jesus' teaching confronts this cycle by urging believers to trust in God's provision, guidance, and wisdom rather than being enslaved by fear and doubt. In Matthew 6:25-34, Jesus directly addresses the issue of worry. He tells his followers not to be anxious about their life, what they will eat, drink, or wear, because God knows their needs and will provide. By pointing to the natural world, birds that do not sow or reap yet are fed, flowers that do not labor yet are adorned in beauty, Jesus illustrates the principle of divine care and providence. The teaching is clear: if God provides for creation, how much more will he care for human beings, who are created in his image? This perspective encourages trust, reminding believers that their value is recognized and their needs will be met according to God's wisdom. Do not worry is not an invitation to passivity or irresponsibility. Jesus does not suggest abandoning work, planning, or effort. Instead, he teaches the importance of perspective and priorities. Actions should be guided by faith, moral integrity, and thoughtful stewardship, rather than by fear, obsession, or anxiety. When believers act with trust in God's provision, they balance responsibility with reliance on divine guidance. This balance reduces stress and fosters clarity, enabling effective decision-making without being clouded by worry or panic. The teaching also highlights the importance of living in the present. Worry often arises from concerns about the future or regrets about the past. Jesus emphasizes that focusing on today, the present moment, is essential. Each day has its own challenges and blessings, and obsessing over what might happen undermines the ability to live fully and faithfully. By concentrating on the present and trusting God for the future, individuals cultivate peace, mindfulness, and resilience. This approach transforms life into a journey of faith rather than a constant struggle with fear. An essential element of not worrying is developing trust in God. Faith acts as an anchor that stabilizes the mind and heart amidst life's uncertainties. Believers are encouraged to surrender control, acknowledging that while human effort is necessary, ultimate outcomes rest in God's hands. This trust is liberating, replacing fear with confidence, despair with hope, and tension with peace. Jesus' own life exemplified this principle. He faced persecution, rejection, and eventual crucifixion with unwavering trust in God's plan, demonstrating that faith can transcend even the most daunting circumstances. Furthermore, releasing worry has tangible psychological and emotional benefits. Chronic worry is linked to stress, depression, sleep disturbances, and physical health problems. By embracing Jesus' teaching, individuals can reduce anxiety, cultivate emotional resilience, and enhance overall well-being. Practices such as prayer, meditation, gratitude, and reflection reinforce trust in God's care, providing mental clarity and emotional stability. In essence, choosing not to worry is both a spiritual discipline and a practical strategy for healthier, more balanced living. Do not worry also fosters gratitude and contentment. When one is constantly anxious about what might happen, it is easy to overlook present blessings and the provisions already granted. Trusting God allows individuals to recognize and appreciate the abundance in their lives, cultivating a sense of satisfaction and joy. Gratitude becomes a natural extension of faith, reinforcing a positive cycle of trust, peace, and appreciation for life's gifts. The teaching further extends to interpersonal relationships. Worry often stems from fear of inadequacy, rejection, or failure in social contexts. By trusting God and releasing fear, believers approach relationships with confidence, authenticity, and love rather than insecurity or suspicion. This shift promotes stronger, more harmonious connections with others, grounded in faith rather than fear. Practically, adopting the principle of do not worry involves conscious effort and spiritual practice. Prayer is central, allowing individuals to release concerns to God and seek guidance and strength. Meditation and reflection on Scripture reinforce trust and perspective. Mindfulness, journaling, and acts of service help redirect focus from anxiety to purposeful action and compassionate engagement. Over time, these practices cultivate a mindset of faith, resilience, and inner peace, aligning one's life with the teaching of Jesus. In conclusion, the teaching to do not worry is a profound lesson in faith, trust, and spiritual maturity. It calls believers to release fear, anxiety, and obsession over the uncontrollable aspects of life, focusing instead on trust in God's provision, guidance, and timing. By living in the present, balancing responsibility with faith, and cultivating gratitude, individuals experience emotional stability, inner peace, and spiritual growth. This teaching is both practical and transformative, offering a roadmap for navigating life's uncertainties with confidence, serenity, and faith. In a world dominated by stress, fear, and constant uncertainty, embracing Jesus' principle of do not worry provides freedom, hope, and life-changing perspective, embodying one of his most comforting and empowering lessons. 7. Speak the truth. One of the most essential teachings of Jesus is the call to speak the truth. In a world where deception, exaggeration, and manipulation are often tolerated, or even rewarded, Jesus emphasizes the moral and spiritual importance of honesty. Speaking the truth is not merely about avoiding lies, it is a holistic principle that encompasses integrity, transparency, courage, and alignment with God's will. This teaching, while simple in wording, carries profound implications for personal growth, relationships, and spiritual life. At its core, speaking the truth is an expression of integrity. Integrity involves consistency between one's words, actions, and beliefs. When individuals speak truthfully, they reflect inner honesty, moral clarity, and a commitment to righteousness. Jesus taught that truth is not merely a social convenience or legal requirement, it is a reflection of divine reality. In John 8:32, he says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." This statement highlights the liberating power of truth. Speaking, recognizing, and living in truth brings freedom from guilt, hypocrisy, and inner conflict. Truth aligns human life with God's order and creates harmony between heart, mind, and action. Speaking the truth requires courage. Often, honesty comes with personal risk, whether in the form of social disapproval, conflict, or consequences. Human beings are naturally inclined to avoid confrontation or discomfort, and lying or withholding truth may seem easier. Yet Jesus calls his followers to rise above fear and speak truth boldly and compassionately. Truth-telling is a form of moral courage, demonstrating commitment to righteousness over convenience, justice over compromise, and authenticity over pretense. Courage in truth is not about being harsh or judgmental. It is about expressing reality faithfully, even when it challenges norms or personal interest. The spiritual significance of truth is inseparable from one's relationship with God. Jesus emphasizes that God is the ultimate source of truth, and speaking truth is a way of aligning oneself with divine reality. Lies, deception, and hypocrisy distance individuals from God, whereas truth fosters spiritual clarity, integrity, and intimacy with the divine. Speaking truth in love reflects God's character and strengthens faith, creating a foundation for ethical living, moral discernment, and spiritual maturity. By embodying truth, believers participate in God's work of establishing justice, righteousness, and peace in the world. Practically, speaking the truth involves more than avoiding false statements. It encompasses transparency, accountability, and authentic communication. It means expressing genuine thoughts and feelings with honesty, acknowledging mistakes and limitations, and avoiding exaggeration or concealment of facts. In relationships, speaking truth fosters trust, reliability, and mutual respect. Individuals who are known for their honesty are valued for their authenticity and moral integrity, and their words carry weight because they are consistent with action and belief. Jesus' interactions with his disciples and followers consistently demonstrated this principle. He spoke truth even when it was challenging, uncomfortable, or countercultural, guiding others with clarity and moral authority. Moreover, speaking the truth promotes personal growth and self-awareness. Living in alignment with truth requires introspection and courage to confront one's own mistakes, weaknesses, and inconsistencies. By being honest with oneself and others, individuals develop humility, accountability, and emotional intelligence. Avoiding falsehood prevents the accumulation of guilt, stress, and confusion that arise from deception, creating a life of clarity, integrity, and inner peace. Jesus' teaching reveals that truthfulness is both a moral obligation and a practical necessity for spiritual and psychological well-being. Speaking the truth also strengthens communities and societies. When individuals consistently prioritize honesty, trust becomes the foundation of social interaction. Communities based on truth foster cooperation, fairness, and justice, while those rooted in deception breed conflict, suspicion, and instability. Jesus' teaching on truth extends beyond individual morality to social responsibility, emphasizing that ethical communication is essential for a harmonious, just, and compassionate society. By speaking truth, individuals contribute to the creation of a culture of trust, accountability, and integrity. It is important to note that speaking the truth requires discernment and compassion. Truth is most effective and meaningful when communicated with empathy, sensitivity, and wisdom. Harsh or reckless statements, even if factually correct, can harm relationships or escalate conflict. Jesus exemplified the balance between honesty and compassion, speaking truth in ways that illuminated understanding, guided moral growth, and fostered transformation rather than condemnation. Speaking truth, therefore, is not just about facts, it is about intention, delivery, and alignment with love and justice. Furthermore, speaking the truth challenges hypocrisy and moral compromise. Jesus frequently confronted religious leaders and societal norms that distorted truth for personal gain or status. His insistence on truth was a call to authentic living, a rejection of superficiality, and an invitation to moral and spiritual alignment. In today's context, this teaching remains deeply relevant, encouraging individuals to resist manipulation, deceit, and moral shortcuts, and to embrace honesty even in the face of pressure, temptation, or societal expectation. In conclusion, the teaching to speak the truth is a profound and life-changing principle of Jesus. It emphasizes integrity, courage, and alignment with God's will, calling believers to live authentically and communicate honestly in every aspect of life. Speaking the truth fosters personal growth, spiritual clarity, and psychological well-being. It strengthens relationships, builds trust, and promotes justice and harmony within communities. By balancing honesty with compassion and discernment, believers can embody the liberating power of truth, reflecting divine character and moral excellence. In a world often filled with deception, manipulation, and superficiality, Jesus' call to speak the truth offers a transformative guide for living with integrity, courage, and spiritual alignment. 8. Be compassionate. Compassion is one of the most essential and transformative teachings of Jesus. In a world often characterized by self-interest, judgment, and indifference, Jesus consistently emphasized the importance of feeling and acting with empathy toward others. To be compassionate is not simply to feel sympathy or pity, it is to actively engage with the suffering of others, to respond with love, understanding, and practical support. This teaching is central to Jesus' message, shaping personal character, relationships, and the moral fabric of communities. At its core, compassion involves the ability to connect with the emotions, struggles, and needs of others. It requires seeing beyond surface appearances and judgments to recognize the humanity, dignity, and worth inherent in every individual. Jesus demonstrated this principle through his interactions with the marginalized, the sick, the poor, and the downtrodden. He did not merely observe suffering from a distance, he entered into the lives of those in pain, offering healing, comfort, and hope. Compassion, as Jesus taught, is an active and intentional choice, a deliberate alignment of heart and action with the needs of others. One of the profound aspects of compassion is its relationship with empathy. Jesus' teachings encourage believers to cultivate deep sensitivity to the experiences of others, to understand their struggles, and to respond with kindness and patience. Empathy goes beyond mere awareness of suffering. It involves internalizing the experiences of others to the extent that one is motivated to act in ways that alleviate pain and promote well-being. By developing empathy, individuals break down barriers of self-centeredness and cultivate a broader perspective that recognizes the interconnectedness of all people. Compassion also requires humility. To truly care for others, one must set aside pride, judgment, and superiority. Jesus often challenged societal norms that excluded the poor, the sick, and the socially marginalized, demonstrating that true moral and spiritual authority is expressed through loving service rather than dominance or exclusion. Humility allows individuals to approach others with openness and respect, fostering trust and meaningful connection. Compassion, therefore, is inseparable from humility. It requires a willingness to see beyond oneself and to recognize the inherent value and suffering of others. The practical expression of compassion is varied and multifaceted. It can take the form of providing physical aid, such as feeding the hungry or caring for the sick. It can manifest in emotional support, such as listening to someone in distress, offering encouragement, or providing comfort in moments of grief. Compassion also includes acts of advocacy, standing up for justice, and addressing systemic inequities that perpetuate suffering. Jesus' life exemplified all of these forms, showing that compassion is both immediate and far-reaching, personal and societal. One of the transformative powers of compassion lies in its effect on the individual practicing it. By choosing to respond to suffering with empathy and love, individuals cultivate emotional intelligence, patience, and moral sensitivity. Compassion softens the heart, enabling one to experience deeper joy, connection, and spiritual fulfillment. It also protects against the corrosive effects of anger, resentment, and indifference, fostering resilience and inner peace. Practicing compassion is therefore not only an ethical duty but also a pathway to personal growth and spiritual maturity. Compassion also has profound implications for communities and societies. When compassion becomes a guiding principle, social bonds strengthen, trust is nurtured, and collective well-being flourishes. Communities that prioritize empathy and care create environments in which individuals feel valued, supported, and protected. Social injustices, inequality, and violence can be mitigated when compassion drives policies, interactions, and cultural norms. Jesus' teachings encourage believers to extend compassion beyond immediate circles of family and friends, embracing a universal concern for the well-being of all, including strangers and those deemed outsiders by society. Another important aspect of compassion is its relationship with action. Compassion is not merely an emotional response, it requires tangible effort to alleviate suffering. Jesus' encounters with those in need demonstrate that empathy alone is insufficient. True compassion moves one to act. Whether it is healing the sick, feeding the hungry, or advocating for the oppressed, compassionate action embodies love in a practical, transformative way. In this sense, compassion is both moral and spiritual. It connects belief with behavior, intention with tangible results. Moreover, compassion fosters forgiveness and reconciliation. Understanding the struggles and motivations of others reduces judgment and promotes empathy, making it easier to forgive offenses and seek harmony. By cultivating compassion, Individuals create the conditions for healing broken relationships, resolving conflicts, and promoting peace. Jesus' teachings consistently link compassion with mercy and forgiveness, showing that a compassionate heart is essential for personal, relational, and communal transformation. Spiritually, compassion aligns individuals with the nature of God. Jesus consistently portrayed God as compassionate, caring deeply for human suffering, and acting to bring restoration and hope. By practicing compassion, believers reflect divine love in the world, becoming instruments of God's grace and mercy. This alignment deepens spiritual connection, nurtures faith, and cultivates a sense of purpose that transcends self-interest. In conclusion, the teaching to be compassionate is one of Jesus' most powerful and transformative lessons. It calls individuals to connect deeply with the suffering of others, to respond with empathy, humility, and tangible action. Compassion cultivates personal growth, emotional resilience, and spiritual maturity. It strengthens relationships, fosters trust, and promotes justice and harmony within communities. By embodying compassion, believers align with God's character, transform their own hearts, and positively impact the world around them. In a world often marked by indifference, judgment, and division, Jesus' call to be compassionate remains a timeless and life-changing principle, offering guidance for a life of love, service, and moral integrity. 9. Treasure heavenly rewards. One of the most profound teachings of Jesus is the principle of treasuring heavenly rewards over earthly wealth and material possessions. In a world often focused on success, status, and accumulation, Jesus calls his followers to look beyond the temporary and the tangible, directing their hearts and efforts toward eternal values. This teaching challenges conventional priorities and offers a path toward lasting fulfillment, spiritual growth, and alignment with God's will. At its core, treasuring heavenly rewards involves shifting focus from material gain to spiritual abundance. Earthly possessions, status, and recognition are temporary and uncertain. They can be lost, diminished, or corrupted over time, offering little true security or satisfaction. Jesus emphasizes that true treasure lies in what is eternal: spiritual virtues, moral integrity, acts of love, and alignment with God. In Matthew 6:19-21, he instructs, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This teaching highlights the intrinsic connection between values, focus, and the orientation of the heart. Jesus' teaching on heavenly rewards encourages believers to prioritize actions and choices that have eternal significance. Generosity, compassion, service, humility, forgiveness, and faithfulness are examples of spiritual investments that cultivate heavenly treasures. Unlike material wealth, these virtues cannot be stolen, destroyed, or diminished. They endure in the soul and resonate with the eternal nature of God. By valuing these treasures above earthly gain, individuals align their lives with divine purpose, cultivating lasting fulfillment and meaning. Treasuring heavenly rewards also involves a transformation of desire and perspective. Human beings often measure success by wealth, recognition, or influence. These measures, while socially reinforced, are fleeting and ultimately insufficient for spiritual fulfillment. Jesus challenges his followers to redirect ambition, effort, and longing towards spiritual growth, moral integrity, and divine alignment. This shift in perspective fosters contentment, gratitude, and peace, as individuals focus on what truly matters rather than chasing transient satisfaction. By treasuring the eternal, believers experience freedom from material anxiety, envy, and competition. Moreover, this teaching is deeply intertwined with the principle of generosity. When individuals prioritize heavenly treasures, they are naturally inclined to give, share, and act in ways that benefit others. Material possessions become tools for service rather than ends in themselves. Acts of kindness, charity, and service are investments in spiritual wealth, cultivating a legacy of goodness and alignment with God's kingdom. Jesus' own life exemplified this principle. He gave without counting the cost, prioritized spiritual purpose over comfort, and modeled selfless living, demonstrating that heavenly treasures are cultivated through action as much as through intention. The teaching also provides guidance for navigating moral and ethical challenges. Earthly rewards often tempt individuals to compromise principles, pursue shortcuts, or engage in unethical behavior. By focusing on heavenly treasures, believers are reminded that true value is measured not by societal standards or material gain but by righteousness, love, and faithfulness. This perspective strengthens moral courage, promotes ethical living, and fosters spiritual resilience, enabling individuals to resist temptation and pursue a life aligned with God's will. Treasuring heavenly rewards also impacts relationships. When individuals prioritize spiritual values over material gain, they cultivate empathy, compassion, and understanding toward others. Relationships are approached with sincerity, love, and mutual respect rather than opportunism or self-interest. This focus fosters meaningful, lasting connections grounded in moral integrity and shared spiritual purpose. Communities built on these principles experience harmony, trust, and collective growth, reflecting the broader impact of valuing eternal over temporal rewards. Spiritually, this teaching deepens faith and trust in God's provision. Earthly treasures are uncertain and limited, but heavenly rewards reflect the infinite abundance of God's grace. By investing in spiritual wealth, believers acknowledge dependence on divine wisdom, guidance, and care. This orientation strengthens the soul, cultivates hope, and nurtures a sense of purpose that transcends the fleeting concerns of daily life. Jesus' teaching reassures followers that faithful alignment with God yields eternal value, far surpassing the fleeting satisfaction of worldly pursuits. Practically, treasuring heavenly rewards requires conscious effort and deliberate choices. It involves evaluating priorities, setting goals aligned with spiritual principles, and investing time, energy, and resources in ways that reflect eternal significance. Acts of kindness, prayer, meditation, study of Scripture, service to others, and pursuit of moral integrity are all pathways to cultivating heavenly treasures. It also involves mindful disengagement from excessive attachment to material possessions, societal status, or personal acclaim. By regularly reflecting on values, intentions, and spiritual goals, believers can maintain focus on what truly matters. In conclusion, the teaching to treasure heavenly rewards is a transformative and life-changing principle of Jesus. It calls believers to look beyond the temporal, align their hearts and actions with divine purpose, and invest in values, virtues, and acts that endure eternally. This teaching fosters spiritual growth, moral integrity, contentment, and lasting fulfillment. It guides ethical decision-making, strengthens relationships, and cultivates a life of purpose and meaning. By prioritizing heavenly treasures, believers align with God's kingdom, experience freedom from material anxiety, and embrace a life rich in spiritual abundance. In a world obsessed with temporary gain and fleeting success, Jesus' instruction to treasure heavenly rewards offers a profound roadmap for lasting peace, fulfillment, and eternal significance. 10. Follow the narrow path. One of the most challenging and profound teachings of Jesus is his call to follow the narrow path. In Matthew 7:13-14, Jesus says, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." This metaphor of the narrow path represents the disciplined, principled, and spiritually focused life that leads to eternal fulfillment, as opposed to the wide road of indulgence, conformity, and moral compromise. Understanding this teaching requires exploring its meaning, practical implications, and transformative potential. At its core, the narrow path symbolizes a life aligned with God's will and moral principles. It is not the easy or popular choice, but the one that requires intentionality, discipline, and often sacrifice. Human nature tends to gravitate toward the road, the path of least resistance, comfort, and worldly approval. This path may appear appealing because it offers immediate gratification, social acceptance, and minimal conflict. However, Jesus warns that this path ultimately leads to spiritual emptiness and destruction. In contrast, the narrow path may be difficult, demanding, and countercultural, but it leads to lasting life, spiritual growth, and eternal reward. Following the narrow path requires commitment to moral and spiritual integrity. It involves consistently choosing what is right, just, and aligned with God's principles, even when these choices are unpopular or challenging. This includes practicing honesty, compassion, humility, forgiveness, and selflessness, as taught throughout Jesus' teachings. The narrow path demands that believers resist temptations that compromise their values, endure trials with faith, and prioritize eternal rewards over temporary pleasures. This disciplined pursuit of righteousness is at the heart of spiritual maturity and the transformative power of Jesus' message. The narrow path also entails self-examination and personal growth. To walk this path, individuals must continually assess their thoughts, actions, and motivations, striving to eliminate behaviors and attitudes that obstruct alignment with God. This requires humility, courage, and honesty, qualities that foster emotional intelligence, ethical discernment, and spiritual resilience. Jesus' call to the narrow path is not merely about external compliance but about the internal transformation of the heart and mind. It encourages believers to cultivate virtues that endure, shaping character and life purpose in profound ways. Choosing the narrow path often involves challenges, sacrifices, and resistance. In a world driven by self-interest, instant gratification, and societal pressure, living according to divine principles may lead to criticism, misunderstanding, or even persecution. Jesus prepared his followers for this reality, teaching that the path to life is not without difficulty. Yet these challenges are opportunities for spiritual growth, moral fortitude, and deeper reliance on God. The narrow path refines character, strengthens faith, and develops perseverance, ensuring that spiritual progress is both meaningful and enduring. The narrow path is also relational. Walking it requires integrity in interactions with others, fostering compassion, honesty, and accountability. Relationships built on the principles of the narrow path are characterized by trust, mutual respect, and shared commitment to moral and spiritual growth. Conversely, the broad road often encourages superficial connections, self-interest, and moral compromise, which can erode the foundation of meaningful community. By walking the narrow path, believers cultivate healthy, spiritually grounded relationships that reflect divine love and truth. Moreover, the narrow path emphasizes dependence on God. Human strength alone is insufficient to navigate the challenges and temptations along this road. Prayer, meditation, scripture study, and fellowship with other believers provide guidance, support, and spiritual nourishment. Jesus' life exemplified reliance on God's guidance, showing that following the narrow path involves surrendering ego and self-reliance in favor of divine wisdom and direction. This dependence fosters humility, trust, and resilience, allowing believers to remain steadfast even amid difficulties. Following the narrow path is not merely about avoidance of sin or wrongdoing, it is about proactive pursuit of righteousness, love, and service. It requires cultivating virtues, engaging in acts of compassion, seeking justice, and prioritizing eternal values over temporal satisfaction. The narrow path transforms life into a journey of intentionality and purpose, where every decision, action, and relationship is guided by alignment with God's will. This proactive engagement with life distinguishes the narrow path from a passive or defensive moral stance, emphasizing growth, contribution, and spiritual flourishing. Spiritually, walking the narrow path leads to a deeper sense of fulfillment, peace, and purpose. While the broad road offers temporary pleasures, only the narrow path provides lasting spiritual reward in alignment with God's kingdom. Believers who commit to this path experience the transformative power of living in harmony with divine principles, gaining not only eternal life but also spiritual clarity, emotional stability, and moral integrity. The narrow path fosters a life of meaning, resilience, and hope, even amid trials and uncertainties. In conclusion, the teaching to follow the narrow path is a central and transformative principle of Jesus. It calls believers to choose a life of moral integrity, spiritual focus, and alignment with God, even when this choice is difficult or countercultural. The narrow path requires discipline, courage, humility, and reliance on divine guidance, offering both internal transformation and eternal reward. By prioritizing righteousness, love, and service over worldly temptation and ease, believers experience personal growth, spiritual maturity, and lasting fulfillment. In a world that often promotes comfort, conformity, and self-interest, walking the narrow path remains a profound and life-changing call, guiding individuals toward true life and eternal alignment with God's purpose. 10. Follow the narrow path. One of the most challenging and profound teachings of Jesus is his call to follow the narrow path. In Matthew 7:13-14, Jesus says, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." This metaphor of the narrow path represents the disciplined, principled, and spiritually focused life that leads to eternal fulfillment, as opposed to the wide road of indulgence, conformity, and moral compromise. Understanding this teaching requires exploring its meaning, practical implications, and transformative potential. At its core, the narrow path symbolizes a life aligned with God's will and moral principles. It is not the easy or popular choice, but the one that requires intentionality, discipline, and often sacrifice. Human nature tends to gravitate toward the broad road, the path of least resistance, comfort, and worldly approval. This path may appear appealing because it offers immediate gratification, social acceptance, and minimal conflict. However, Jesus warns that this path ultimately leads to spiritual emptiness and destruction. In contrast, the narrow path may be difficult, demanding, and countercultural, but it leads to lasting life, spiritual growth, and eternal reward. Following the narrow path requires commitment to moral and spiritual integrity. It involves consistently choosing what is right, just, and aligned with God's principles, even when these choices are unpopular or challenging. This includes practicing honesty, compassion, humility, forgiveness, and selflessness, as taught throughout Jesus' teachings. The narrow path demands that believers resist temptations that compromise their values, endure trials with faith, and prioritize eternal rewards over temporary pleasures. This disciplined pursuit of righteousness is at the heart of spiritual maturity and the transformative power of Jesus' message. The narrow path also entails self-examination and personal growth. To walk this path, individuals must continually assess their thoughts, actions, and motivations, striving to eliminate behaviors and attitudes that obstruct alignment with God. This requires humility, courage, and honesty, qualities that foster emotional intelligence, ethical discernment, and spiritual resilience. Jesus' call to the narrow path is not merely about external compliance but about the internal transformation of the heart and mind. It encourages believers to cultivate virtues that endure, shaping character and life purpose in profound ways. Choosing the narrow path often involves challenges, sacrifices, and resistance. In a world driven by self-interest, instant gratification, and societal pressure, living according to divine principles may lead to criticism, misunderstanding, or even persecution. Jesus prepared his followers for this reality, teaching that the path to life is not without difficulty. Yet these challenges are opportunities for spiritual growth, moral fortitude, and deeper reliance on God. The narrow path refines character, strengthens faith, and develops perseverance, ensuring that spiritual progress is both meaningful and enduring. The narrow path is also relational. Walking it requires integrity in interactions with others, fostering compassion, honesty, and accountability. Relationships built on the principles of the narrow path are characterized by trust, mutual respect, and shared commitment to moral and spiritual growth. Conversely, the broad road often encourages superficial connections, self-interest, and moral compromise, which can erode the foundation of meaningful community. By walking the narrow path, believers cultivate healthy, spiritually grounded relationships that reflect divine love and truth. Moreover, the narrow path emphasizes dependence on God. Human strength alone is insufficient to navigate the challenges and temptations along this road. Prayer, meditation, scripture study, and fellowship with other believers provide guidance, support, and spiritual nourishment. Jesus' life exemplified reliance on God's guidance, showing that following the narrow path involves surrendering ego and self-reliance in favor of divine wisdom and direction. This dependence fosters humility, trust, and resilience, allowing believers to remain steadfast even amid difficulties. Following the narrow path is not merely about avoidance of sin or wrongdoing, it is about proactive pursuit of righteousness, love, and service. It requires cultivating virtues, engaging in acts of compassion, seeking justice, and prioritizing eternal values over temporal satisfaction. The narrow path transforms life into a journey of intentionality and purpose, where every decision, action, and relationship is guided by alignment with God's will. This proactive engagement with life distinguishes the narrow path from a passive or defensive moral stance, emphasizing growth, contribution, and spiritual flourishing. Spiritually, walking the narrow path leads to a deeper sense of fulfillment, peace, and purpose. While the broad road offers temporary pleasures, only the narrow path provides lasting spiritual reward and alignment with God's kingdom. Believers who commit to this path experience the transformative power of living in harmony with divine principles, gaining not only eternal life but also spiritual clarity, emotional stability, and moral integrity. The narrow path fosters a life of meaning, resilience, and hope, even amid trials and uncertainties. In conclusion, the teaching to follow the narrow path is a central and transformative principle of Jesus. It calls believers to choose a life of moral integrity, spiritual focus, and alignment with God, even when this choice is difficult or countercultural. The narrow path requires discipline, courage, humility, and reliance on divine guidance, offering both internal transformation and eternal reward. By prioritizing righteousness, love, and service over worldly temptation and ease, believers experience personal growth, spiritual maturity, and lasting fulfillment. In a world that often promotes comfort, conformity, and self-interest, walking the narrow path remains a profound and life-changing call, guiding individuals toward true life and eternal alignment with God's purpose. 12. Love your enemies. One of the most radical and challenging teachings of Jesus is the command to love your enemies. In Matthew 5:44, he instructs, "But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." This teaching is revolutionary because it defies natural human instincts of retaliation, anger, and self-preservation. Loving one's enemies is not merely an abstract moral ideal. It is a practical, transformative principle that reshapes relationships, strengthens character, and aligns individuals with God's higher purpose. At its core, loving enemies involves extending compassion, understanding, and goodwill even toward those who oppose, hurt, or seek to harm us. This does not mean condoning injustice or ignoring wrongdoing, but it requires a conscious choice to respond with love rather than vengeance. Jesus' teaching challenges the instinct for retaliation, teaching that true strength, moral integrity, and spiritual maturity are reflected in one's ability to transcend anger, resentment, and fear. Love, in this context, becomes a deliberate act of courage, discipline, and faith. Loving enemies begins with perspective. Human beings often respond to conflict and opposition with judgment, resentment, and retaliation. Jesus calls his followers to adopt a higher perspective, recognizing the shared humanity of all people, understanding the causes of their actions, and acknowledging the transformative power of forgiveness. This perspective shifts focus from personal hurt to moral and spiritual growth. By seeing enemies as fellow human beings capable of change, believers cultivate empathy, patience, and moral clarity. Forgiveness is a crucial component of loving enemies. Holding on to anger, bitterness, or resentment can be corrosive to the soul, disrupting inner peace and spiritual alignment. Jesus teaches that releasing these negative emotions is both an act of obedience to God and a path to personal liberation. Forgiveness does not necessarily remove consequences for wrongdoing, but it transforms the heart of the one who forgives. By choosing to forgive and love enemies, believers align themselves with God's grace, demonstrating a commitment to higher principles over personal grievances. Loving enemies also cultivates inner strength and emotional resilience. Resentment and revenge consume mental and emotional energy, leading to bitterness and relational dysfunction. By choosing love over hatred, individuals free themselves from the destructive cycle of anger and retaliation. This practice fosters emotional stability, clarity of thought, and the ability to respond wisely to challenges. Jesus' own life exemplified this principle. He faced betrayal, mockery, and crucifixion with unwavering love, prayer, and forgiveness, showing that divine strength is expressed through love, even under extreme adversity. Furthermore, this teaching has profound social implications. Conflicts, hostility, and cycles of revenge often perpetuate suffering within families, communities, and societies. By practicing love toward enemies, individuals break these cycles, promoting reconciliation, peace, and justice. Acts of kindness, understanding, and forgiveness can transform relationships, de-escalate tension, and foster cooperative, harmonious communities. Jesus' message demonstrates that personal morality and social transformation are interconnected, with love acting as the catalyst for both. Loving enemies also requires humility and self-awareness. It challenges pride, ego, and the need for superiority, demanding a recognition that all human beings are fallible and in need of grace. This humility allows for empathy, moral discernment, and spiritual alignment. By acknowledging one's own limitations and vulnerabilities, believers are better equipped to extend understanding and compassion to those who oppose or hurt them. Humility transforms the act of loving enemies from a forced obligation into a genuine expression of moral and spiritual depth. Practically, loving enemies involves both thought and action. It begins with intentional reflection, prayer, and a conscio. As commitment to respond with love rather than hatred. It extends to words and deeds, speaking respectfully, refraining from retaliation, offering assistance when possible, and seeking reconciliation. It may also include advocating for justice in ways that are constructive rather than vengeful. By integrating this teaching into daily life, believers cultivate a habit of moral courage, empathy, and integrity that extends far beyond immediate conflicts. Spiritually, loving enemies aligns believers with the character of God. Jesus presents God as a source of unconditional love, mercy, and justice, extending grace even to the undeserving. By emulating this divine example, individuals cultivate spiritual maturity, moral clarity, and alignment with divine will. Loving enemies is thus both a reflection of God's character and a pathway to experiencing God's transformative presence in one's own life. In conclusion, the teaching to love your enemies is one of Jesus' most radical, countercultural, and transformative principles. It calls believers to extend compassion, forgiveness, and goodwill even toward those who oppose or harm them. Loving enemies fosters moral integrity, spiritual growth, emotional resilience, and relational harmony. It breaks cycles of vengeance, promotes reconciliation, and aligns individuals with divine wisdom and purpose. In a world often dominated by conflict, retaliation, and division, Jesus' command to love enemies offers a revolutionary path to personal liberation, social transformation, and spiritual fulfillment. By practicing this teaching, believers embody the highest ideals of courage, grace, and divine love, reflecting the essence of Jesus' moral and spiritual vision. 13. Be faithful in small things. One of the most practical yet profound teachings of Jesus is the principle of being faithful in small things. In Luke 16:10, Jesus declares, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much." This teaching emphasizes that spiritual maturity, integrity, and responsibility are developed through consistency, diligence, and faithfulness in everyday tasks, no matter how insignificant they may seem. It reminds believers that greatness and trustworthiness begin with small acts of obedience, honesty, and care. At its core, being faithful in small things involves cultivating consistency and responsibility in daily life. Human beings often underestimate the importance of minor actions, viewing them as inconsequential. Yet Jesus teaches that these small choices reflect character and moral fiber. Whether it is fulfilling commitments, being honest in minor matters, or showing kindness in small ways, these actions form the foundation for greater responsibilities and spiritual growth. Faithfulness in small things is not trivial. It is the training ground for integrity, discipline, and reliability. The teaching also emphasizes the development of trust. When individuals demonstrate faithfulness in small matters, they earn credibility, respect, and confidence from others and from God. Conversely, negligence or dishonesty in minor responsibilities undermines character and limits opportunities for growth. Jesus' teaching underscores the principle that moral and spiritual authority is built incrementally, through repeated, conscientious choices that honor God and reflect ethical living. Small acts of integrity are seeds that grow into trustworthiness, responsibility, and influence. Being faithful in small things also nurtures humility. In a world that often glorifies grand gestures, achievements, and recognition, Jesus highlights the value of humble diligence. Faithfulness does not seek attention or reward but honors God through consistent, quiet obedience. This humility aligns the heart with spiritual purpose, reinforcing the idea that service, integrity, and moral character are more important than outward success or acclaim. Jesus himself exemplified this principle in his life, performing acts of love, service, and teaching consistently, without seeking personal recognition or glory. Moreover, faithfulness in small things cultivates discipline and perseverance. Spiritual growth and moral development are rarely instantaneous, they require ongoing effort and attention to detail. By faithfully attending to minor responsibilities, individuals develop habits, skills, and attitudes that prepare them for larger challenges. This disciplined approach extends to prayer, study, service, and ethical decision-making, fostering a life of intentionality, reliability, and spiritual growth. Jesus' teaching demonstrates that small acts, when practiced faithfully, accumulate into significant moral and spiritual impact over time. Practically, being faithful in small things can be expressed in numerous ways. It includes honesty in routine interactions, diligence in work or study, attentiveness in relationships, and consistency in spiritual practices such as prayer, meditation, or service. Each act, however small, is an opportunity to align with God's will and cultivate trustworthiness. For instance, helping a neighbor, listening attentively to a friend, or completing a minor responsibility conscientiously reflects faithfulness in everyday life. These practices reinforce moral integrity, spiritual awareness, and reliability. The teaching also has relational implications. Faithfulness in small matters fosters trust, reliability, and respect in relationships. Friends, family, colleagues, and communities depend on the consistency of individuals, and small acts of faithfulness build the foundation for meaningful, enduring connections. Conversely, neglecting small responsibilities can erode trust and create conflict. Jesus' principle reminds believers that relational strength is rooted in everyday integrity and reliability, not merely in grand gestures or declarations. Spiritually, faithfulness in small things aligns the believer with God's purposes. God values obedience, consistency, and integrity more than superficial success or occasional grand acts. By faithfully fulfilling minor duties and making morally sound choices, believers demonstrate alignment with divine principles and readiness for greater responsibilities. This principle also reflects the broader biblical teaching that God honors faithfulness, regardless of scale, rewarding consistent devotion, diligence, and ethical living with spiritual growth, opportunities, and blessings. Furthermore, this teaching encourages mindfulness and intentionality in daily life. It reminds believers that every action, no matter how small, matters in the eyes of God and contributes to spiritual formation. By paying attention to seemingly minor details, choices, and responsibilities, individuals cultivate awareness, discernment, and moral sensitivity. This attentiveness strengthens character, promotes ethical consistency, and reinforces the habit of aligning all actions with divine values. In conclusion, the teaching to be faithful in small things is a practical, transformative, and life-shaping principle of Jesus. It calls believers to cultivate consistency, integrity, and diligence in everyday responsibilities, recognizing that small acts reflect character, build trust, and prepare individuals for greater challenges. Faithfulness in small matters nurtures humility, discipline, relational trust, and spiritual maturity. By integrating this principle into daily life, believers develop reliability, moral clarity, and alignment with God's purposes, demonstrating that true greatness begins with faithful attention to the seemingly insignificant. In a world often focused on grandeur, recognition, and immediate results, Jesus' teaching reminds us that small, faithful actions lay the foundation for lasting spiritual growth, influence, and eternal reward. 14. Live with integrity. One of the most essential and transformative teachings of Jesus is the call to live with integrity. Integrity is the quality of being honest, morally upright, and consistent in thought, word, and action. It reflects alignment between one's inner values and external behavior, creating trust, respect, and spiritual authenticity. In a world where compromise, deception, and superficiality are common, Jesus' emphasis on integrity is both radical and life-changing. This teaching provides guidance for personal growth, ethical living, and deep spiritual fulfillment. At its core, living with integrity involves being true to one's values and principles in all circumstances. Human beings often face pressures to conform, deceive, or take shortcuts for personal gain. Jesus teaches that integrity requires resisting these pressures, maintaining honesty, and acting in accordance with divine and moral principles, even when inconvenient or challenging. Integrity is not merely about avoiding lies, it encompasses the consistent expression of truth, fairness, and righteousness in everyday life. It is the alignment of character, speech, and action with God's will. Integrity is closely tied to trust. Individuals who live with integrity earn credibility, respect, and confidence from others and from God. In contrast, those who act deceitfully or inconsistently create doubt, conflict, and instability in relationships. Jesus emphasizes that true moral and spiritual authority arises from consistent, honest living, not from outward appearances or temporary achievements. By cultivating integrity, believers become reliable and trustworthy in personal, professional, and spiritual spheres, embodying the values they profess. Living with integrity also requires courage. Upholding moral principles often involves facing criticism, opposition, or personal loss. Human nature tends to seek safety, comfort, and approval, making ethical compromise tempting. Yet Jesus calls his followers to act courageously, prioritizing righteousness over convenience. Courageous integrity involves standing for truth, justice, and ethical principles even when it is difficult or unpopular. Jesus exemplified this courage through his life, confronting hypocrisy, injustice, and corruption with unwavering adherence to God's truth. Practically, living with integrity is expressed through honesty, accountability, and moral consistency. It includes keeping promises, fulfilling responsibilities, being transparent in communication, and making ethical decisions even when no one is watching. Integrity also involves humility, acknowledging mistakes, learning from failures, and taking responsibility for one's actions. These practices reinforce character, strengthen relationships, and cultivate trustworthiness, providing a foundation for meaningful personal and spiritual growth. Integrity fosters spiritual alignment and personal authenticity. When one's actions reflect inner values and divine principles, there is harmony between heart, mind, and behavior. This alignment nurtures inner peace, reduces internal conflict, and enhances moral clarity. Jesus' teaching reminds believers that external success or recognition is meaningless without inner moral coherence. By living with integrity, individuals cultivate a life that is true, consistent, and spiritually centered, allowing God's guidance to manifest fully in their choices and actions. Furthermore, integrity strengthens relationships and communities. Trust is the cornerstone of healthy connections, and it is built on honesty, transparency, and ethical behavior. Individuals who act with integrity contribute to environments of fairness, respect, and cooperation, fostering strong social bonds and collective well-being. Conversely, deception, manipulation, and inconsistency erode trust, creating tension, suspicion, and conflict. Jesus' teaching demonstrates that personal integrity has ripple effects, influencing both immediate relationships and broader social structures. Integrity also promotes resilience. Sense and moral clarity in challenging situations. Life is filled with temptations, pressures, and ethical dilemmas. Individuals who have cultivated integrity are better equipped to navigate these challenges, maintaining composure, making wise decisions, and resisting moral compromise. This resilience is rooted in consistent practice of ethical behavior and alignment with divine guidance, creating a strong foundation for navigating life with confidence and spiritual maturity. Spiritually, living with integrity aligns believers with the nature and character of God. God is depicted as perfectly just, truthful, and consistent in principle. By emulating this divine attribute, individuals cultivate a life that reflects God's values, deepening spiritual connection and growth. Integrity is thus not only a moral requirement but a spiritual practice, expressing devotion, obedience, and alignment with divine purpose. Moreover, integrity enhances personal fulfillment and self-respect. Individuals who act consistently with their principles experience satisfaction, confidence, and a sense of moral and spiritual coherence. In contrast, dishonesty, hypocrisy, or inconsistency leads to guilt, anxiety, and inner turmoil. Jesus' teaching emphasizes that integrity is foundational to living a meaningful, purposeful, and spiritually aligned life, reinforcing the interconnectedness of morality, spirituality, and personal well-being. In conclusion, the teaching to live with integrity is a central and transformative principle of Jesus. It calls believers to align their thoughts, words, and actions with moral and spiritual principles, cultivating honesty, courage, and consistency in all areas of life. Living with integrity fosters trust, strengthens relationships, promotes spiritual alignment, and enhances personal fulfillment. It equips individuals to navigate challenges with resilience, maintain moral clarity, and contribute positively to their communities. In a world where compromise, deception, and superficiality are common, Jesus' call to integrity offers a profound path toward authentic, purposeful, and spiritually enriched living. By embodying this teaching, believers reflect God's character, experience inner harmony, and cultivate a life of lasting moral and spiritual significance. 15. Serve others selflessly. One of the most profound and transformative teachings of Jesus is the call to serve others selflessly. In Mark 10:45, Jesus declares, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This teaching challenges natural human tendencies toward self-interest, ambition, and comfort, emphasizing that true greatness is found in humility, generosity, and the willingness to prioritize the needs of others. Serving selflessly is not only an act of moral obedience but a spiritual discipline that cultivates character, deepens faith, and transforms both the giver and the receiver. At its core, selfless service involves prioritizing the well-being of others without expectation of reward, recognition, or personal gain. It requires empathy, compassion, and moral courage, as well as a conscious decision to place the needs of others above one's own convenience or desires. Jesus exemplified this principle throughout his ministry, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, comforting the grieving, and ultimately sacrificing his life for humanity. True selfless service is motivated not by obligation, pride, or the desire for social acclaim, but by love, humility, and devotion to God's will. Serving others selflessly begins with empathy and understanding. To respond effectively to the needs of others, one must recognize their struggles, vulnerabilities, and humanity. Jesus consistently demonstrated this deep awareness. He saw beyond superficial appearances, societal status, and prejudice to engage with people where they were, addressing both their physical and spiritual needs. Empathy allows individuals to discern where their actions can have the greatest impact, fostering meaningful, compassionate, and transformative service. Selfless service also requires humility. It challenges pride, ego, and the desire for recognition. In serving others, believers set aside personal ambition, judgment, and the need to dominate, embracing a posture of generosity and care. Humility makes service authentic and effective, reflecting the character of Jesus and fostering genuine connection with those being served. By humbling oneself in service, individuals align with God's values, cultivating spiritual depth and moral integrity. Practically, selfless service can take many forms, ranging from small daily acts to significant commitments. It includes helping a neighbor in need, volunteering in one's community, mentoring others, offering emotional support, and advocating for justice. Every act, no matter how small, is an opportunity to practice humility, compassion, and moral courage. Jesus' teaching underscores that the impact of service is not measured solely by its scale but by the intention, love, and faithfulness behind it. Even seemingly minor actions can produce profound spiritual and relational outcomes when performed selflessly. Serving others selflessly also transforms the character of the person who serves. Regular acts of generosity, kindness, and humility cultivate virtues such as patience, empathy, resilience, and moral discernment. These practices strengthen the heart, foster spiritual growth, and enhance emotional intelligence, enabling individuals to navigate life's challenges with compassion and integrity. Selfless service is therefore both an outward act of love and an inward process of personal and spiritual development. This teaching has deep relational and societal implications. Selfless service builds trust, strengthens community bonds, and fosters cooperation, empathy, and mutual respect. In families, workplaces, and communities, individuals who serve selflessly inspire others, promote harmony, and create environments of care and accountability. Conversely, self-centeredness and neglect undermine trust, erode relationships, and create division. Jesus' life illustrates that transformative impact arises not from authority or power but from humility, service, and love expressed consistently in action. Spiritually, selfless service aligns believers with God's purpose and character. Jesus consistently emphasized that serving others is a reflection of serving God, linking acts of kindness and generosity to spiritual devotion. Selfless service is a form of worship, an expression of obedience, and a means of embodying divine love in tangible ways. By serving without expectation of reward or recognition, individuals participate in God's redemptive work, fostering transformation in the lives of others while cultivating spiritual maturity and alignment with divine values. Furthermore, selfless service nurtures gratitude and perspective. When individuals devote time and resources to helping others, they gain a broader understanding of human needs, challenges, and interconnectedness. This perspective reduces self-centeredness, cultivates appreciation for blessings, and reinforces moral and spiritual awareness. Acts of service remind believers of their responsibility to contribute positively to the world, fostering humility, generosity, and a sense of shared humanity. Selfless service also involves courage and moral fortitude. Serving others may require stepping out of comfort zones, facing inconvenience, or confronting injustice. Jesus' example demonstrates that true service often entails sacrifice, perseverance, and endurance. Courageous service reinforces resilience, strengthens ethical character, and exemplifies faith in action. By embracing challenges in service, believers embody the transformative principles of Jesus' teachings and participate in creating meaningful, lasting change. In conclusion, the teaching to serve others selflessly is one of Jesus' most powerful and transformative lessons. It calls believers to prioritize the needs of others, act with empathy and humility, and perform acts of love without expectation of reward or recognition. Selfless service cultivates personal character, spiritual growth, relational trust, and societal harmony. It reflects the nature of God, aligns believers with divine purpose, and fosters meaningful transformation in both the giver and the receiver. In a world often dominated by self-interest, competition, and indifference, Jesus' call to serve others selflessly offers a profound guide for living with purpose, love, and lasting spiritual significance. By embodying this principle, believers create ripples of positive impact, exemplify divine compassion, and live in accordance with the highest ideals of faith and moral integrity. Thank you so much for watching. I hope these 15 powerful deep teachings of Jesus have inspired you and brought some spiritual guidance to your life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. I would love to hear which teaching impacted you the most. And of course, subscribe to Sleep in Bible and hit the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming videos full of faith, inspiration, and spiritual wisdom. Remember, every step you take to grow spiritually makes a difference in your life and the lives of those around you. See you in the next video.